Hey everyone, we're going to review graphing and variables today. So on your graphs you need to make sure you have these 6 things: the title, the axes, labels, units, numbers, and a key. Here's an example. So let's point out the different parts. The title is going to tell you what your graph is about. The axes are your x and y axes. Okay. Your x-axis usually is your independent variable, and your y-axis is your dependent variable, which we'll talk about in a second. Labels are very important because they tell us what is on each part of the graph. So on this part, on the x-axis, it's telling us the different school year that the data was collected. And on the y-axis, it's telling us how much money in thousands they spent on each student. Many times there's also units that go along with the labels. So they talk about expenditure per student. What does this 6.1 mean? Is it $6.1 per student that they spend on per year, or $6.1 million? Well, it tells us it's $6.1 thousand. For the numbers, you want to make sure that you equally space out your data. Okay, so we have it equally spaced out here along our x-axis and our y-axis. So in that way, you can see trends in the graph. If it was too small or too big, all the numbers might not fit on the graph. And if it was too small, it may be too squished, and we wouldn't be able to see what the trend is. And finally, having a key is important because when we have 2 lines, we need to know which color line stands for which. So they talk about the total expenditure in the orange line, and then in unadjusted dollars, this is without taking into account inflation. So you can see it's a direct increase of how much money is spent on students, and when you take into account inflation, it's still been increased over time. So that is graphing. All right, so now we're going to talk about variables. In science experiments, it's very important to have variables. There's 2 different types of variables. There's your independent variable, and that is what we change. So IV stands for independent variable. And we also have a dependent variable. So in this experiment, you can see that we are changing how much we water the plant. Okay, so we've got no water, 20 milliliters of water, and 40 milliliters of water. So our independent variable is the amount of water. Our dependent variable then would be the data, or what we are measuring. So in this experiment, our dependent variable would be the growth of the plant. Finally, there's also a control in this experiment, and that is the plant that you're not doing anything to. We're not adding any extra water. It's still kept in the sunlight just like all the other plants, but we're not changing anything. We're just keeping it in constant conditions. So our control is going to be the plant with no water, and that's what we're going to compare our other 2 plants to.